these, what I would call modern fundamentalist movements, have landed on, that is awful. Aquinas is not a Christian because he's part of the Catholic Church. He holds up the magisterium. He believes in the Pope. So you need to completely cut off any natural philosophy from Aquinas. And these were the same people who were anti-critical race theory, which I believe, without reading it, were anti-mask, and believed in some part the coronavirus was like a government conspiracy to bring about a new world order. These are all the same people. And this is like the arc I've seen them go on in 2 years. I'm like, have you just been locked in your house so long that you've gone absolutely insane? Or, what I see is like this new fundamentalism of like, we have to batten down the hatches because there's threats from science, from the government, not from actual viruses because, you have the power of Christ, from critical race theory, which is going to disrupt, from, LGBTQIA who want to be heard. And now they're going to turn our 5-year-olds into what they would see as like abominations. Not that I believe they are, right? And now
I'm just saying because I'm following you.
Yeah. And on top of that, a Catholic theologian is now being referenced by Protestants. Like,
even though Aquinas is terrible.
You think he's terrible?
No, even though they think Aquinas is terrible.
Yeah. So it's just further proof that we need to, separate. Which I think is the basis of fundamentalism, right? It's separate, because the unclean, they're just as like Christ's righteousness gets imparted to you in Christianity. So his cleanliness makes you clean, right? The uncleanliness of someone else can make you unclean, right? Which is why in the Old Testament, you sort of like unclean people have to like leave for a little bit, right? Like you're unclean if you touch a dead body for a day, go away. Because that's gonna,
This is like a dissertation. And it's a perspective that I haven't heard laid out like that before. And it's interesting. I think maybe during COVID we all existed in our own little social media bubbles, and because I saw on social media, in terms of Aquinas, there's a lot that you said that resonates, but like in terms of specifically Aquinas, I saw some people moving toward natural theology as a way to argue against modern, postmodern secularism, and so the framework that I was seeing was very different. And it's interesting because I'm not a big natural philosophy guy, Aquinas myself, but obviously I'm not I'm not a COVID conspiracy theorist. I don't want to keep throwing out like labels, but you know what I'm saying. And I think that there were some Reformed pastors that were not masking, not so much trying to argue against scientism per se, although there's always that strand of like, we can't trust science, yada, yada, yada. But there were people just on the principle that the Bible says, do not forsake the meeting of yourselves together.
Sure.
And also like, it's like, we'll swallow the risk. It wasn't so much going overboard to try to prove that the whole thing was a hoax. It's like, maybe it's real, maybe it's not. Bible says we still have to meet together. And so we will, and we're not under the jurisdiction of like secular elitist kind of people, especially people that are godless and don't care about what we care about. So we're just going to do what we want because God says that we're the church and we're free. That was like more of the thing that I saw.
Yeah, I definitely had some of those people. And, I would say for their theology, that's true. Like, I think Paul and Jesus are like, you give to Caesar's what's Caesar's and you obey the laws of the land unless they contradict the laws of your faith. In which case faith trumps that. And you might have consequences. Right, like if the state's saying you can't meet for worship and you decide to do it, you might go to jail or pay a fine, but you need to wholly do that for Jesus.
Right.
So there's definitely those, but the strain that I saw going, which I would say like so far right, I don't even know like if there's a direction for it. They definitely followed the conspiracy theory, and those are the ones who I saw pick up critical race theory, and those are the ones who are now, like you said, there were some evangelicals who found some value in Aquinas, And these people, which I would call new fundamentalists, are like, you guys are gonna on the border of losing your faith and being heretics.
Well, that's interesting. But I was also saying some of these evangelicals who were taking up Aquinas are also taking far right positions politically, are also anti Black Lives Matter, are also talking a lot about critical theory, critical race theory in particular,
right.
And a lot of just polemics against critical race theory. You can just YouTube it, just YouTube pastor critical race theory. You'll find YouTube videos with like 1 million views of 50-minute long sermons of guys just like, this is why this is why the Bible disagrees with critical race theory. Right. And it's like, this works if you know what critical race theory is. Otherwise, it's a straw man, right? And I think by and large, it is a straw man. I put out a Facebook post/poll, I think about a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago. It goes by so fast, but I put out a poll on Facebook one time. How many of you who consider yourself leftists can tell me what critical race theory is? And
I think I chimed in.
And most of the people, I was like, I don't want to hear from any conservatives because I know you know. You know what it is. But it's like, how many of you people consider yourself leftists? Maybe even like neo-Marxists? Like, what is critical race theory? And there were like a bunch of people that were like, yeah, I'm on the left. I identify as liberal, and I don't know what that is. I've heard of it, but I don't. And there were even a couple of people that were like, what is that? I'm talking about intelligent people. I'm not talking about like, what is that? Because what I wanted to reveal was like, what popularized critical race theory was not academia.
Right.
It was the people who were afraid of a boogeyman that just kept talking about it. And I feel like that post demonstrated reality. There was one person on there who actually was knowledgeable, someone who did her, I don't know if it was her dissertation, but she did some work, she did some study at Keene State, who's a moderately conservative Catholic.
Yeah.
She knew what she was talking about on that thread when it came to critical race theory, but for the most part, I think it's a boogeyman. I don't purport to know what I'm talking about when I talk about critical race theory.
Right. Well, I mean, so I took a critical theory class in college as part of my political science major. Mm-hmm. And for those who are wondering, I had physics, math, and political science because I've mentioned the physics and math. And then I was like, this is stupid. Like, Marxism failed. Stop trying to fix it. Mm-hmm. And I think critical race theory. Now, I have a little more nuanced view of critical theory now. Is it's just a way to. I mean, so it doesn't actually. It's much more like trying to poke holes in other philosophy than it is necessarily trying to build up its own, from what I understand of the Frankfurt School. And they're also like German philosophers, so it's incredibly dense and boring and, confusing at times.
Yeah.
Like, critical race theory is such a small offshoot of critical theory, which is like an offshoot of neo-Marxism, which is like it's like you're getting so thin on the branches of this tree of philosophy that like it has no impact whatsoever unless you believe in sort of this Illuminati, New World Order, mark of the beast, right? Like literal interpretation of Revelation, I think. And so what you do is you batten down the hatches and you run into the church and you close the doors, right? Because zombies are outside. Mm-hmm.
My view from the inside is that people have been prepped for that way of looking at the world for a long time, and maybe there's a lot of like preternatural, like psychological stuff that's already in there that allows people in the pews and their pastors and their seminary profs to sort of like just need to look at the world that way. And I don't know if you saw. I saw this article the other day where they had Fox News viewers watch CNN.
Yeah, and they changed their.
Yeah, like they immediately.
Well, it was like 30 days. After 30
days, like flipped.
Yeah.
So there's the hypothesis is like, these are very impressionable people,
right,
who
I think,
actually are not maybe never feel like they're on sure footing. And so any person that seems confident that comes along and is like, here it is, here's certainty, rock solid, this is what it is. And it just so happens that their entire life, those people have had a particular way of looking at the world. And so by the time they're in their 45 or 55 or 65, they can't just go, it's a lot easier to deconvert when you're 25.
Yeah. And I just want to be fair to that study, because I think it's partially bad science, right? Because it's showing a correlation, not a cause.
Yep.
Also, if they were actually trying to do it, they would need MSNBC viewers to watch Fox News for 30 days straight with no other, and see if they also changed, right? Because I think people in general, like, conform somewhat to the standards around them. Now, there's always the prophet, like Martin Luther King Jr., who's like, wait, like, there's a better way. But I just think most people are impressionable and they want to fit in, and we don't do critical thinking all that well. Is it David? Not David. We'll just call him Professor Kahneman. He wrote the book Thinking Fast and Slow, and the vast majority of our thinking is fast, because thinking takes a lot of calories, right? So critically examining every single claim by every person, like, it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of like physical calories, which our bodies were not designed. Like, our bodies are designed to, like, conserve as much as possible.
And it can make you go insane.
Yeah. Right. Like Nietzsche.
Right. and so our bodies are like, maybe you should not do that. Maybe you should watch a TV show now.
Right. But, if you had to examine every chair ever,
right,
and, like, you see a chair, you're like, I can sit. Sometimes that works out really bad, right? And it makes YouTube videos and people laugh. But for the vast majority of times, like, you don't know, like, oh, let me use my critical thinking here. Is this sturdy? Like, how much weight can this hold? Let me do some math and see if the physics of, the tensile strength of this bolt is enough. So I think most people don't do critical thinking very well. And I think psychology backs that up, and so does sociology. So you take these people and you make them watch a different perspective, and only that perspective for 30 days. They're going to change their mind.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter which camp they fall into, I don't think. Although I think, and this needs to be fact checked, and maybe I'll put it in the podcast notes or tweet about it or something. I think atheists and agnostics in general are more likely to change their mind than those who attend a worship service weekly.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Right. Agnostics are like, I don't know. So
it makes sense. Yeah, that's fair. I can really only go off my own observations and experiences here, but I've done my own critical thinking from within that small world of, like, trying to figure out what's motivating these people, because that's a lot of the people that I minister to and run with, is like, and I hope that I'm not coming off as, like, condescending or patronizing, because I want to say critical thinking is hard, and I also want to say a lot of people don't have time for all that. Like, the amount of people in our world that are in survival mode far outweighs the amount of people that, like, have 4 hours on a Thursday to do a podcast, or read a book.
Yeah, hierarchy of needs, right?
Right.
Like,
right.
Let me get air, and then water, and then food, and then some sleep, and self-transcendence. It's like...
Right. So I kind of feel like, as a pastor, one of the privileges that doesn't get mentioned very much is the privilege of, like, hey, there are people that are willing to commit to listening to you for 30 minutes to an hour every week. And
pay you to do some critical thinking.
And pay you to think through what you're going to say.
Yeah.
And so that's disturbing on some levels. it's terrifying on other levels. And if you have a soul, or if your ego